Hello, global students, and welcome to episode 5 of our Global History and Geography Regents Review series. This section will cover quite a few topics, so get ready. Let's start with Communist China. Alright, so we can't talk about Communist China without the civil war that will create Communist China. So, the dictator of China, his name was Chiang Kai-shek. His political party were called the Nationalists. And overall, he wasn't a huge fan of peasants. Then, you have the rise of the Communist Party in China, and they were led by Mao Zedong. You 150% need to know him. And the classic question on the Regents is, how did the communists win the civil war in China? It's because they had the support of especially the Chinese peasantry, because they were like 90% of the population. So, the war will end, the communists win, and they rename China the People's Republic of China. It's still the name of China today. The nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, they fled to an island just off the east coast of China called Taiwan and make their own country. It's still a separate country today, although not many countries of the world today acknowledge it as one. And Mao Zedong, the leader of the communists, becomes the new dictator of China, and his title was chairman, so they called him Chairman Mao. Alright, so some policies to know under under Mao Zedong's dictatorship of China. Ooh, I have enough time today. As the first one's going to be his Great Leap Forward. So, right now, I want you to make a connection to Joseph Stalin's rapid industrialization plan in the Soviet Union. Mao Zedong is going to copy Stalin in the late 50s and early 60s. So he wants to bring China into the modern sphere. He wants to create an economy that will compete with especially the United States. So that means he needs to produce a lot of food, and also he needs to rapidly industrialize, focus on the big stuff, coal, steel, iron. You know it. So, like Stalin, he will collectivize agriculture. He made massive communes that were in the ballpark of 30,000 people. And the idea is to create really efficient farming systems. In theory, it could work. In reality, we're going to see what happens. So, because this is also attached to the industrialization campaign, and frankly, that was probably more important, according to Mao, he starts forcing peasants to stop farming and create these backyard steel campaign with these furnaces. So, like, this is actually a photograph of them, and they're trying to make steel in their backyard, but it's peasants doing it who weren't trained properly. So, since they're trying to make, poor quality steel, they're not farming, what's that going to do? That's going to cause a food shortage because they're not farming. So this actually creates the worst famine in human history. I've seen numbers between 15 and 55 million people in China were killed in this famine. So ultimately, the Great Leap Forward actually hurt the Chinese economy more. Some people began to criticize Mao Zedong, which leads to his next policy, the Cultural Revolution, where he's going to try and reconsolidate, re-centralize his power in China. And the way he's going to do that is turn him into basically this godlike figure in China, or often what we use in dictatorships, we call it a cult of personality. He's going to make Chinese worship him. And that's called the Cultural Revolution. So, that means he needs to get rid of anybody he thinks disagrees with him. Purge his opponents, his political opponents. Purge anybody he considers to be old, not with the new system. So, first he starts targeting members of the Communist Party. Stalin also did something very similar in the late 1930s. If you were not executed, you were often sent to one of these hard labor camps. They still exist in China to the very day. And the people he's going to use to spread his message of making himself into this cult of personality are going to be students, late high school and into college. And he called them the Red Guard. And the reason he used students is students are impressionable. He knows students, they want political influence. And when they're able to denounce their elders, their own teachers, their parents, that's real political power they have, and they really grasp onto it. So he's going to really push this cult of personality with students, a young population, and ultimately, though, it's going to actually hurt China economically speaking, and it does kill at least 1 million people in this 10-year process. So, Mao Zedong dies in 1976. There's like a 2-year power struggle, and here is the next Chinese dictator to know, Deng Xiaoping. And there's going to be 2 ideas to know with him, are his economic policies and also his political policies, one of which he's willing to reform and one of which he is not willing to reform. All right, so let's start with his economy. Because of Mao, the Chinese economy is lagging behind most of the world. He wants to revive it. He wants to make it into one of the best economies in the world, and he will be successful. So economically, Deng was a reformer. I'll say that again. Economically, Deng was a reformer. So here's what he's going to do. He's going to create his 4 modernizations. For us, we're going to really focus on his agricultural changes and also his infusion of capitalism. So the agricultural changes is he is still going to maintain a quota system. So for example, say you're a rice farmer, you will have a quota of how much rice you need to produce per year. But if you surpassed your quota, you could sell the extra stuff you made on the free market for a profit. Remember, free market means you can determine what you charge and you can make money off of that. So what he's doing is he's combining capitalism with the communist system, and it's extremely successful. This is the reason China has the 2nd largest economy in the world after the United States, because he's really going to force manufacturing into China. The United States is going to start sending its clothing manufacturing to China because they're going to do it for so cheap. Very, very, very cheap labor in China. And ultimately, this is extremely successful policy. Additionally, he acknowledged that China had an overpopulation problem, and this is where he implements the extremely controversial one-child policy. And it does work. It does significantly slow the population increase in China to the point where they eventually turned this into a 2-child policy in 2014, and then in 2021 they completely abolished all restrictions on family planning. But again, because they have an authoritarian, a totalitarian system in China, they're able to create these policies like this. All right, so I already mentioned the effect. The 4 modernizations are wicked successful. So, long story short, Deng Xiaoping is willing to economically reform. He adds a little bit of capitalism to the Chinese economy. But now let's talk about politics. Is he willing to politically reform? No. So, 1989, big year for democracy. Eastern Europe, all those satellite states, they start becoming democracies. We start seeing the collapse of the communist system in Eastern Europe. Soviet Union will collapse in 1991. 1989 is the year of democracy. In China, students want democracy in China. And they start protesting in the biggest square in Beijing called Tiananmen. And they want democracy. They want transparency in the Communist Party. And now Deng Xiaoping has a decision. Does he give in? Does he give a little bit of democracy? Does he reform? Or does he send in the troops? Yep, he's going to send in the troops. So in June of 1989, the military sent in. It's tough to find exact numbers on how many students they kill. They kill at least 800 to 1,000. And what is our takeaway? Deng Xiaoping and the Communist Party of China are not willing to politically reform. It will still be a one-party state. It still is in this year that I recorded this, 2023. And it's a significant balance to the economic reform. So China is going to politically be a very opaque society. All right. Changing gears to our next topic is going to be decolonization in Africa plus the apartheid regime in South Africa. So make sure you understand after World War II, European countries are hurting for money, and it actually cost them more money to like control their colonies than what they were extracting from them. So frankly, it was too expensive to have a colony. Then you add in the growing nationalism in Africa, and you have the seeds for decolonization on that continent. So make sure you know this form of nationalism called Pan-Africanism. It's this idea of solidarity, togetherness between all people of Africa and their descendants. So African Americans have a form of Pan-Africanism. But also this translates to promoting independence of African colonies from their colonizer. So, the Pan-Africanist to know, and also the nationalist of Africa to know, is Kwame Nkrumah. He is going to lead Ghana to its independence. They're really the first black country in Africa to gain independence from a European colony. And additionally, they do it in a peaceful way. So, sort of like Gandhi, they're going to use boycotts, peaceful boycotts, and strikes. It ultimately works. Britain leaves without a fight. Then on Kenya, a similar idea. The leader of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta, will also advocate for boycotts, civil disobedience. For our purposes, the same thing. And Kenya is going to be, ooh, there's a typo there, my bad. Kenya will also be independent by 1964. All right. So, just some potential enduring issue to talk about is one economic problem African countries will experience after independence is they're usually still dependent on their former colonizer economically because they relied on really the stuff that frankly got them colonized in the first place is those natural resources that are still exporting to their former colonizer. So that means their economic systems are still tied together. All right. I'll skip that for now. All right, South Africa, gotta know it. I can pretty much guarantee you will see a question about the apartheid government of South Africa from 1948 to 1994-ish. Gotta know it, gotta know it, gotta know it. All right, so apartheid. So first, the direct translation means apartness in Afrikaans. And what that really means, though, is South Africa is going to have a legal segregation of race. So remember, white South Africans were a significant minority. They were about 15% of the population, and they're going to create a government that is 100% white-led. And black South Africans cannot vote. They cannot be in the military. They have absolutely no political control over their own country. So the apartheid government has a very simple goal: maintain white supremacy. So the white South Africans, usually they spoke two languages, English obviously, but also Afrikaans, which was a dialect of Dutch. There was a one political party that controlled South Africa from 1948 to 1991, and it was called the National Party, again, 100% white. Remind yourself of just the significant discrepancy between black South Africans and white South Africans. It is immense. Financially speaking, medically speaking, I mean, look at the difference between infant mortality. Infant mortality is the percentage of babies that die before their first birthday. That's immense. All right, so understand some of the racist laws that white South Africa will create to disenfranchise black South Africans, make sure they have no power in the government. First one is the Pass Laws Act, which forced all black South Africans to have a passport. It restricted where they could travel. It's going to be tied to another law that restricts where they can live. And again, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights explicitly says people have freedom to travel, and this government is saying, no, you don't, and it's completely based on race. Similar is, this is where white South Africans will revoke citizenship of black South Africans. They're going to be forced to live in the poorest part of the country. So, overall, every part of South African society was segregated. In the white areas, black South Africans still had to work there, which is why they had those passport systems, but they couldn't live there, and that's why they're having all of this segregation. So, the resistance. Gotta know the resistance. The African National Congress is your political party to know. It will eventually be led by Nelson Mandela, and they have a very simple goal: remove apartheid government and create an equal South Africa. So, Mandela is going to be the poster child of, yet again, nonviolent civil disobedience, taking one out of Gandhi's playbook, and he's arrested in 1963. He is convicted of terrorism by the South African government. He's placed into prison for 27 years. But his movement continues. The resistance continues. And the white South African government is doing everything they possibly can to crush this resistance. So some examples of the overwhelming force in human rights violations the white South African government will perpetrate. First one is Sharpeville Massacre. You have black South Africans protesting those pass laws, and the police are sent in, they start shooting people. What starts happening, though, is this police brutality is becoming much more widespread in its public notoriety. The United States starts protesting the South African government. It's going to continue for the next 25 years. Well, I should say 30 years. And really, really bad police and military repression of black South Africans was in the Soweto uprising. So students, I'm talking like elementary school, middle school, high school, they were protesting a law in South Africa that required all instruction in their schools to be in mostly Afrikaans, sometimes English, but mostly Afrikaans. Most black South Africans do not speak Afrikaans. And that means they're in school, but they're not learning anything. And all that does is perpetuate this cycle of poverty and disenfranchisement of black South Africans. So they protest peacefully. The military is sent in, and they start shooting the kids. And they kill hundreds and hundreds of kids, many with bullet wounds in the back. So by the 1980s, the protests of the South African government in other parts of the world are pretty widespread. You go to a college campus anywhere in the U.S., I can guarantee you there's some type of protest against the racist government of South Africa. So the United States starts pulling its money in investments out of South Africa. South Africa is losing billions of dollars. Plus, you have the continued resistance of the African National Congress. Something needs to change. South Africa gets its last white president, who was fairly liberal, especially compared to his predecessors, and he acknowledges change needs to happen. So first and foremost, he releases the leader of the African National Congress. Mandela, after 27 years, is free. And now the work really starts. They will eventually allow its first truly free elections in South African history. They had universal suffrage, regardless of race, gender, etc. 1994, I was 3 years old. They finally had their first truly free election. The African National Congress won the vast majority of votes in their parliament. Mandela is elected president. And we can say in 1994, apartheid is officially gone in South Africa. Now, to be fair, we can't say it's all, happiness forever now. Even to the very day in 2023, as I record this, most of the wealth in South Africa is centered on the white population. Think about Elon Musk. Elon Musk is South African, and he's like the richest person on earth. So it's still economically pretty divided in South Africa, but at least politically speaking, it has gotten significantly better since 1994. So occasionally the Regents will ask about how South Africa is going to bring these perpetrators of the apartheid government to justice, and it's very different than the Nuremberg trials that brought some of the perpetrators of the Holocaust to justice. Truth and Reconciliation Councils in South Africa, they brought in these, the guards of prison camps, etc., and they would have them speak to the families they killed. And if the Council of South Africans believed that they were truly sorry for the violence they committed, they actually let them off the hook. And that's a really different way of going about figuring out how to make a new country. And that was Mandela's whole idea, is he doesn't want to start a new country with just, attacking white people, because that's just going to perpetrate the violence all over again. So he's trying to make a different way of creating a more peaceful means of coming out of this long history of violence. Now, to be fair, the majority of the people who were brought to these Truth and Reconciliation Councils were still guilty. They didn't let the majority off the hook, I promise you that. All right, so I'm going to make that the end of this section here, and we'll have one last episode to go. Thanks for listening. Bye.